So welcome back, everybody. Mickoski is back, and we are going to talk about the question, is this simulation ending? And if so, why and what can we expect? Howdy, welcome back. So good to see you.
Thanks. I guess it's been 6 months, something like
Mhm.
that, 8 months. Yeah,
No, no, six, I guess. Yeah. Yeah,
great.
I have to say, when I thought about this, is this simulation ending and what indications do we have? What came immediately to my mind was that we seem to have reached a pinnacle of incompetence, stupidity, and insanity, especially when it comes to governance. When I look at the government here in my country, I'm deeply troubled. Yeah. And what irritates me the most is that those people are extremely proud of their nonsense. And so, what indications do you see?
Well, the first indication anybody would have to be asking, of course, is how do you how can you test if you are in a simulation, right? How
Hmm.
can you step one is back to, well, you're in a reality. How do you know what that reality is? And if we look to the more ancient world, much more in the past, the basic description that was given of reality was it's a type of dream. That was how it was presented, sort of comparing this world to what we experience when we sleep. But now, given that computers are sort of the key element, it gives a new metaphor to use for trying to explain reality, that of being a type of computer generated experience. Okay, so what would that mean? A simulation. Well, simulation, the word itself would indicate two things. One, a simulation is built on something else, right? Like you and I couldn't, if we built just a video game on something, that's not a simulation. If we made a movie or a film, that's not a simulation. A simulation is, by its term, sort of, you can kind of say it like it's modeling something else that's already in existence, and then it's being run to test certain things from that original place. So if I was we were just talking about energy in your country before we came back. So if I was going to say, well, what are the energy supplies going to be in Germany if it gets really cold this winter? Well, then I could create a simulation that puts in expectations of certain weather and then see how much energy is used, and you get, so that's the first step. If you're in a simulation, then if we're in a simulation, then it must mean we're a copy of something else or we're modeled on something else. It's not sort of open-ended. That's one. Second, there's three elements to see test if you're in simulation. So that's hard to test, but that's what you have to keep in mind. Two is that a simulation will be focused on building the present and the future, because it's focused on building where you're starting the simulation from, going forward where you're testing or experimenting where the simulation will go. So it will mean that what we would call the past will not be put very much into the simulation. That'll just be there enough to that it exists, but it won't have any detail. So someone claimed before that if you're looking at history and you have gaps in history, or you have things that can't be explained, or it's very difficult, it's highly likely you're in a simulation, because a coder would code the present and the future and not the past. The third piece to recognize if you're in a simulation or not is free will-ish. Because if you give if you give characters in a simulation no free will, that's not a simulation, it's a movie. Or it's a yeah, that's the best way of describing it. You've built a movie, so you have to build in some free will, you might say, in order to see what choices vary. Because again, you're not going to run one simulation, you're going to run 10 million simulations, and you want variations of what occurs in it in order to test your hypothesis, right? Your experiment, your hypothesis. So there has to be some free will, but it also can't be complete. Otherwise, that's too big of a simulation to create and to code. So if we take all of those things into consideration, it's highly likely we're building into that that's what we're in. If you take those three ideas together of that's kind of the experience we deal with on a day-to-day basis, step one indicates this is highly likely than a simulation, not a true, real created world.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and what gave you the idea that this is coming to an end, this particular simulation?
Just because that it indicates from our past that it's come to an end before. That um, what might be called resets. Well, okay, there's things that you might call resets, which are changes in the way the simulation is being run. So it's still going linear in a linear fashion, but you make a major change somewhere in it, one way or another, to alter in a grand scheme where it's going. Other times you'd have more like what's a reset, or sorry, restart, where you literally, but not restart. And well, some restarts would be going back to the beginning. So that would be like a looping kind of experience where you go to a certain point and it doesn't just end, it loops back to the start and restarts again, like a giant Mobius strip. Um, but there's also indications that there comes to a certain point where the simulation A ends and simulation B begins. And what I've come to see is very odd in that is you can actually kind of find breakpoints where there's things are so unbelievably different after a particular timeline very, very quickly. And the challenge of if that's true, which I now believe that that is true, it makes history very, very difficult to want to explore because our simulation then has a start date. And that's also something that has to be a simulation. There's a date of beginning, just like any video game you put in, it begins on April 8th, 1965. Okay, that's the day the game begins. So a game, this particular simulation had a start date. What seems like is though this is all just my opinion, of course. These are all just my own personal views on this for everyone. So this is just for all of you to question and think. Don't necessarily think I have everything figured out. I don't. Um, but it seems like the new simulation is built on the old one. So it gives us again this idea that the simulation is built on something else. And that doesn't mean the simulation could be built on a different simulation. But and this will bring us to the moment we're in now. But so if I'm in simulation A and I want to create simulation B, two things have to happen. One, I have to take like a camera snapshot of the moment I want to copy. And then two, because simulation B will do something different, that's the reason I'm changing it. That's the reason I'm ending one and I'm building another one. There's certain things I like to put in the new one, but if I already pre-code them in the old one, if I place certain things in simulation A, you might say when I take the snapshot and turn on the new one, they're already there. I don't have to like rebuild anything. I don't have to dig into the coding of number two. It's already been done in number one. So the what you called the strangeness or the insanity or the whatever that's going on, I think it's an indication that has nothing to do with this simulation. The thing we're in
Okay.
now, they're not building for this one. They're in a sense they're putting the building blocks in place of what the next one is going to be like when we switch over. So then it starts to make more sense. It's crazy from what's going on here, but if we begin to see that actually it's being built for over there, now it starts to make more sense.
Um, but I could not say that it makes it more sane.
Oh, it's definitely not sane. I said it makes more sense. It makes
Okay.
more sense as to what's going on and why it's going on, as opposed to like right now from our own experience, it's it's absolute insanity, and it should be seen as insanity by all elements, including the ones doing it. But if you recognize that, well, they know that their job is to prepare the next simulation. Now their thinking can be understood. Their process in what they're doing can be understood. Now, granted, the next simulation is going to be way worse than this one. However bad people think this one is, the next one is going to be just like every simulation, you might say, is going deeper and deeper. We have this thing has been started over the last, I don't know, 20 or 30 years, this new 5D ascension. We're growing into this new wonderful realm, and we're going to ascend to this higher vibration, and it's going to be wonderful. Well, to me, D means down, depth. It doesn't mean you're going higher. It means you're going deeper into the quicksand. You're going, so if I think we're actually in 4D, not 3D, like people try to tell us. We're actually in 4D. So then by going to 5D, you would actually be going even one level deeper into the matrix. You're going another layer of simulation into the simulation. It's everything like the simulation we're in now. Well, the one that had been previous wasn't as bad as this one. And the one before that, well, wasn't as bad as that. So to me, you don't want to go forward into the next simulation, actually, and you don't want to stay here. You want to go backwards. You want to work your way through all of the other simulations we've been a part of until you reach the point where you can actually exit the simulation completely.
Yeah. When you say those that appear to be insane, they are building for the next simulation. And from that point of view, it makes more sense. But wouldn't that mean they are aware that they are doing it? Because I cannot wrap my mind around that, because some people are so freaking stupid. I have a hard time to imagine they can bind their shoes in the morning.
Let's say of the 1%, or let's call it really less, it's less than that are involved in really making any decisions. Let's say it's 0.1% of the whatever we think of as humans on this planet are involved in this process. Let's then say 1% of that 0.1% maximum know what haven't, and they don't even know fully. They just have some ideas. The higher they go up the pyramid, they know a little bit more, but only the one or the few at the top who are literally the connecting point between the other realm, the beings in the other realms who are running this thing, and the ones who are like the initial contact point. They're about the only ones who have a pretty good idea. Everyone else then down below is like on a need to know basis. And they either trust those above them or have gotten to a point where it's like army mentality. The one above you says to do this, so you just do it. You don't ask why. And that's kind of what you're dealing with. So the majority, like if you say you went into that 0.1% of people running this stuff and you ask them why they're doing it, they would really probably believe that it has something to do with fixing this place or controlling this place, or it's about money, or it's about energy, or it's about some war that might have. They really probably believe that. Only a few above them know that they're as deceived as the people that they're deceiving below them. So it's like deception that just goes deeper and deeper and deeper until you get to a certain point where like the majority of humans aren't even deceived because they don't have, like you say, they don't even have the thinking critical capacity to even question what's going on. So you can't be deceived actually if you're like an automaton robot, right? There's no deception. What comes in is how you act and perform. So the ones that we could call deceived are the ones that at least could, by sitting down and actually thinking what's going on, how's it going on, what's the experience is going on, that could then say, wait a minute, this is really screwed up. It's obviously insane. There's still a huge percentage below that just there's no chance that will end. But when you think of it that way, it's like a level of deception that just keeps moving deeper and deeper and deeper, like in a pyramid, and it gets more and more and more and more and more. But the further you go up, yeah, they know a bit more, but not necessarily the total scheme of what's going on. And again, this is just my personal opinion of it, but it really indicates when you start looking into ancient texts, whether it be the Nag Hammadi Gnostic documents, whether you look into elements of Hindu philosophy, whether you look into certain elements of Hermetic and early ancient texts, there's all this indication of like a revelation point of the Bible where there's like a gigantic, explosion of everything, and then a complete, I want to say like a rebirth, but a complete remaking of what's been torn down and destroyed, like on a grand cosmic scale. So it's there in all of these texts, and it's either presented as coming, or it's presenting as it's already happened, and here's what happened the last time. Either way, it's indicating that, well, it's probably going to happen again. And all indications of where we are is that it's likely now, that all of the things that are happening are not by accident, that it's happening at this exact time frame, that there is this switch is going to be, one's turned off, one's turned on. And we're actually in the point of which we probably did the last time, right? Where we talked about reincarnation and the fact we've been going through this for a long time. So because all of us are still here, you and I are here, that means probably we lived through the last one. Whatever the last of these simulation changeovers was, you and I lived through that. And on some level, at least for me, for sure, there is obviously some memory of that. And it's kind of saying, I'm not doing that again. Like, just no way am I going through this stupidity and going deeper again. So like, it's like, this is it. And I would say, sorry if I'm rambling a bit, but I would say that it's part of the reason that this kind of information is showing up now, and such like this idea of soul traps and reincarnation theory, and of being in like a prison environment. That's not necessarily new, totally, right? It's been around for 50, 60 years in certain writings. Schopenhauer was kind of getting close to it in his philosophy of the early 1800s. He didn't fully get to he saw the world as a prison, but he didn't fully get the way the trap worked, and his focus became more of a Buddhist philosophy of how to live as best you can in a prison, as opposed to how do you get out of a prison. So, but it's like, as we've gotten more and more closer to this point, it seems to that idea is becoming more and more open and accessible. And certainly in the last few years, it's become much greater. I would assume, again, that's got to be because we're getting close. If we're the further you are away from this, the less likely it's going to be a topic of discussion for people.
Hmm. I recently heard a totally different take on Soul Trap, in the sense that they do not exist and the soul can, by definition, never be trapped, and that you will only experience it if you believe it. What do you say?
Yeah, that's the hopeful. I with my thought, I control my world.
Mhm.
That me and my thought are the same thing. So it comes originally from this idea of still believing me and thought are real. It even includes that me and soul, that the soul is real, is a real true entity. Now, what I would say is the true element of us is something which would be a divine spark, the thing that's from not from the simulation. Now, the divine spark is part of the soul, but it's the soul is a number of different things, even that of which is built from the matrix. So even at the soul, even if you reach the soul, which is very important to do, and I it's one of the key elements of the work is to first get back to your actual soul level. But even if you do that, you're still you're still like half in, half out. You haven't still gotten to your true, complete, uh, well, it's not, even the divine spark is divided. And so, in a sense, we're, you can't, yeah, okay, how to say this so that your question is also kind of true. It's not like it's false, what you just said. The comment you made is not actually false either. It's that at the level of the divine spark only, where there is nothing from the matrix attached to it, then yes, that divine spark would be free to completely, in a sense, exit. The challenge is that means every little piece of that which is false, that which is deception, that which is believed to be true but is not, all of it has to be dropped off. You can't have one little piece clinging to it. Otherwise, you could call it in Buddhist terms, that would be another attachment. And eventually, because there is a potential attachment, the attachment will happen and you'll be in here. So it becomes a work of having to strip off every single possible deception. And I don't just mean like on a physical level. I mean like on an astral level, on like every single level of the multiple beings, that multiple layers of our being that we exist in. All of it has to be dropped. Only then would you be at the point of, and then at that point, with that total awareness, then with nothing attached to it anymore, cannot possibly be trapped. So it's, yeah, in a sense, I think what you said is true. It's just probably the way the people say it, is still has a trap element within it, if that makes sense.
Mhm. So there is, at least as long as you have not gotten rid of any matrix elements, there is a certain danger to it. If you think everything all is good, we just do it on autopilot, don't worry about it, you will be fine.
Um, if someone, I mean, again, if I can never tell anyone what to do, I don't even like to necessarily
Yeah.
recommend what people should do.
Mm.
Um, Generally, someone won't even come to such a possibility like I suggest unless general life has gotten to the point where it's just one level or another, just so unhappy, so difficult, so painful, not even necessarily for themselves. I mean, they might be doing okay, but they look around them and they just see people and animals and nature in constant suffering around them. And that's enough for them to say, even though I'm doing okay, I'm not happy with how the whole rest of this place is structured. And so I'm ready for something else. Until someone is at that point, then yeah, sure, just go. And I mean, the Matrix cave is massive. Like this, the Plato's cave is huge, and it truly does have every experience possible. I consider them all to be false. They're all deceptions. They're all of a fake material world. I mean, to me, what point is if you have gold bars on your prison, you're still in prison. So, but until you get to a certain point, I certainly would never suggest someone to back out of the matrix. You can't back out of the matrix until there is this deep intention of saying, I've kind of done this. I've done this enough. And I know see, that's the other really great challenge. I have this conversation a lot with some people who come to me with this conversation. That is, they're still trying to fix this reality. Like they're still trying to make this reality better. And it's a really good example from, since I'm talking to someone from Germany, to bring up Schopenhauer, because one of Schopenhauer's really valuable pieces of information that he did get, there's a lot of stuff I don't like about his work, but of the things that he did like, or I do like, was his recognition that the when you look at evil and pain and pleasure and good, evil is actually the positive element here, because the world is designed in such a way to be evil in its origin. So from that perspective, it's evil and pain is positive because that's what the simulation or this world is trying to move towards. So oddly, when we work to being good or are being pain free, we're actually operating in a negative, in the negative perspective. I don't mean, again, by you can't look at that as good and bad. You're looking at it as repelling and rejection, right? That's what it means, sort of in magnetic terms. So it's really, really odd. It's kind of backwards when you start to think, when someone says, I don't want bad stuff in my life, I want to remove the negativity. Bizarrely, you could almost be saying, by the way the language is structured, you're actually trying to push away the good stuff, because actually the good stuff in relative terms to the reality is negative. It's so bizarre when you begin to see how inverted everything is placed and how language has inverted everything, that we can think we're doing one thing and we're doing the opposite. So given his thesis, if the world is designed to be evil, trying to fix it is another way of just developing more suffering, as opposed to recognizing, like, hey, the best use of my energy is to work on myself and to work on the changes within who and what I am, and let this crazy place be crazy because I can't fix it. But as long as the energy goes out there, and I'm not saying, like, don't try to improve your life, don't try to help people around you, don't, that's very, we can see we can have an effect on small groups, we can have an effect on, but as soon as we try to fix the world, it doesn't matter how fabulous you are, how much money you have, how smart you are, you always fail. And in fact, the world tends to get worse. But those who work on themselves, and those who work on, say, a group of 10 or 15 close friends or family members or whatnot, small little tribe, that can have huge impacts. So it becomes this switching of energy, from switching it from, I'm going to fix, and I'm saying, I don't want to say fix, some focused out there to focused here. And with the focus here, a lot can happen. So that's kind of how I kind of remind people that, and again, everybody has their program, you might say, everybody has their life scripts, everybody has, so some people, and I'm grateful for the people that are, you might say, fighting the insanity and are, because it's very difficult for them. They're under a lot of strain, they're under a lot of pressure from the system, who are trying to do things, whether legally or medically or whatever, right? And I'm thankful for doing it, that they're doing it, because it does have something for people. But will that actually help you exit the matrix? Not necessarily. What it does help do, though, for those who are involved in that process watching this, what it does do is how to say this easily, you can never obtain ultimate freedom if you give up your relative freedom. You can never gain ultimate truth if you ignore relative truth. So that's why someone said, well, you say the world isn't real, it's a simulation. Why should I care whether this is true or that's true? Or because it's, if you ignore relative, if you ignore the relative, if you just ignore this place completely and how it's set up, there, you're not building a inner capacity for that which might be ultimate, right? Someone's like, you saw your cat there. Well, obviously, I would assume, like all of us, you love your cat, right? Wonderful creature. Now, it's not ultimate love, like what would be, like when we talk about what that word really means, something totality that has nothing to do with the material. But that word is useful in that it builds the possibility that if you have none of that here, it'll be almost impossible to experience or handle it, you might say, there. So all of these things are important in the relative, as long as we understand it's not about the relative that I'm doing it. I'm doing it to build my inner being to be ready to handle what might be the ultimate of what that word points to. Because again, if it's a simulation, it's copied on something. So everything we're dealing with, even emotions, are copies of something from some much greater, much truer reality. So that's why you can't ignore the world. Those that kind of do that Advaita thing about, well, the world's an illusion, so just drink your tea and it doesn't matter. Well, partially it's true, but because you do have to see that, but then you have to recognize, but I'm in the simulation. The simulation has certain rules and certain strangeness to it. And if I ignore the simulation completely, actually, I would never be able to get to the place that these invited people think they already are. They'll get blocked partway along the way because they haven't done any testing work on themselves, preparation work for handling what those real emotions or those real things are. I know I kind of ramble sometimes, but does that make sense to what
Yeah,
I'm saying?
it makes sense. And no, I didn't think that was rambling. Could could it be that one of the reasons why this simulation is shutting down is that, yeah, for the most part, we have experienced everything that's possible here in terms of good, bad, ugly, and dictatorships and this and that and hunger and war and going from bankrupt to billionaire or vice versa. So, meaning already um, uh, there's no point in continuing it because it has been experienced. Do you think there's
Oh,
something?
oh no, there's a point. And the point is energy extraction. And when you think of it all in terms of energy, that again, that from my
Yeah,
viewpoint and from sort of a Gnostic viewpoint, that The only reason the simulation exists, or main reason it exists, is the extraction of energy from the
Yeah.
beings that are within it. That energy, bizarrely, is used to actually power the very system to keep it running. So it's like the simulation or the matrix isn't plugged into a wall socket, it's plugged into all of us. We are the ones that are the energy source. The problem is as the matrix doesn't stay stable, I don't want to go into all the reasons why it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Science explains it. Oh, the universe keeps expanding, it keeps getting bigger. And in a sense, that's true. The matrix keeps growing. And as the matrix grows, it needs more energy. It needs more power. The problem is it gets power from all those things that are in here. So it gets to me, when a simulation makes a change from one to another, it's because the energy component of the way the simulation has been built doesn't generate enough power that the simulation now needs. And it also creates part of the unstableness. I don't know if you've noted, like Mandela effect is a good example. Just glitches in the matrix that are happening, bizarre things going on. I think that's because, just like we were talking about earlier, how, hey, Europe is probably going to have to start is going to be turning off the power in certain countries this summer because, or this winter, because it's going to be overloaded systems and et cetera, et cetera. They're not ready. They don't, well, that's symbolic on a smaller scale of what's happening on a bigger scale. The matrix in itself is going through shutdowns every once in a while because it actually doesn't have enough power to keep it continually running. And if they just let it just flow, they would burn everything out. The matrix would die out. So they actually have to turn down or turn off the power. When they do, that's what we get glitches in the matrix. Things don't work properly because it's not running right. So in a sense, these beings that run the whole thing, the demiurge, whatever you want to call it, feels it's time they need a different power source. They need to upgrade the power. And when you recognize that that's all what's going on, the new simulation is built on a new way to extract power from energy from the beings within it. And I said this many times, if you think of it the way we are this way, here's the system, here's like one of us in the system. It's pulling energy from us, but there's a gap. There's a space between the two, so energy is going to get lost just naturally. When I try to, heat gets lost. But if you do this, if you put the two together, there's no space when you do the energy extraction, so there's no lost energy. You wouldn't have to build more of these if you just do this. That'll cover your energy loss. And so why are they trying to turn humans into machines? Why are they trying to put human and machine together? Well, once the human and the machine are no different, there's no loss in the energy extraction. So I actually think what's going on now is building what you might call, building a new kind of human, and possibly, if they could do it, a new kind of complete creature. I think they're starting with humans, but eventually they'd like to do it to everything, birds and fish and giraffes and everything, where there's this ability where there's no space between the machine extractor, you might say, and the thing that they're extracting the energy from. And so to me, everything that's going on now is all a part of building, like I say, how that's going to be in the next simulation. So even if they get things done here, it won't make any difference here, because you might say the coding of this video game, it does things a certain way. So even if it doesn't matter the kind of outward changes that happen here, the extraction is the same. But if you change the coding, and the new game will code this way differently, as soon as you put like people into the next one, the extraction is automatically different. So that's why it's so hard. We're watching how things go on based on the way things are and have been for 100 or 200 years, trying to understand how that change here will affect things as we've always known them, as opposed to when you start seeing the changes that are happening are built for a place that we have no idea actually how it's all going to be set up and run. And while that's not a good answer of knowing what it's going to look like, it gives you enough of an explanation to say, oh yeah, it's it's way darker than I ever even imagined. Like once I kind of got this, it's like, oh, what's going on is darker than I ever possibly imagined, because it's building a trap even better than the trap they have here.
Hmm. Okay. Recently, I did an interview with Dr. Judd Burton, and we talked about the collapse of the Bronze Age. And that was really, really bad because,
Sorry,
among
I
other,
missed that. You talked about
collapse of the Bronze Age. Bronze Age.
Yep.
And that was really, really bad because we even lost the ability to read and write for roughly 500 years. Would you say that falls into the category of some type of reset?
Yeah, it makes sense. I don't know how many exactly we've had. I would for sure, just what seems obvious is what you might call true pyramid building period time. I mean, the big ones, the ones that are in Giza and Dashur and Teotihuacan, and that was one period because it's so obvious that what came after it was so not the same. It was completely, even if you go when you look at Old Kingdom Egypt, where they couldn't build anything. Even the stuff is fabulous, but it's nothing compared to the old megalithic structure. So that was one period. We had another period, then we had this sort of temple building period around the world for a certain number of years, and then that ended one way or another. Then we got into what you might call cathedral-like building, or these buildings with domes and towers and structure. And we had that period of time for a certain amount, and then that ended, and we begin what we might call the modern age, this thing of very um, and when you look at the modern age, the way modern cities are designed and the way that if you look at it from above, it's exactly the same as when you look at various computer motherboards, right? There's when you put like New York City and a computer motherboard side by side, you couldn't tell which one is which. They look exactly the same. So I would say we've got four guaranteed, probably. And I know people will argue, are dinosaurs real? Is that real? But if we assume for the sake of conversation they're real, well, that would obviously be another one there seems to be obvious points, things that are the change was so drastic, particularly in the architecture and the way people lived. And okay. And then then you've got all these minor ones that you could slot in, depending, of course, if the history we're getting is true. And that becomes another huge issue because the further you go back, I mean, even past 50 years, history becomes a massive question mark, really since the Kennedy, and I don't even want to call it assassination because we have no idea what happened there, right? I just call it the JFK event. That's all we know. We don't know actually at all what happened there. That's just like 60 years ago, right? 60 years ago last week. We don't really have a clue there. Everything before that, we truly don't know anything. As much as the standard historical community tries to make things concrete in history, we have no idea. So it gets harder and harder as we go back in time to try to say that really happened because we have no firsthand evidence. We have no photographs, we have no videos, we have nothing. We have some supposed writings and fragments and whatever, but have no we have nothing to guarantee that the fragment or the writing or whatever comes from the time we say that it comes from. Because there's a lot that have claimed that a lot of history was written by the Jesuits and others in the 1700s, that they just kind of falsified history during a possible reset time. So all we can kind of do is look at the history of the biggest things we've got, particularly buildings, because buildings are at least they're still there. We can still see them. They're obviously majestically built. Can we notice at least a difference between types? And I think that's the first place we can start, at least for kind of picking guaranteed change points. And then the other ones that are within, it's like, well, how well do we trust the history that is likely true, or it could just be ways of, again, explaining a timeline that doesn't actually exist.
Would you say that these resets, are they done out of necessity or simply for fun, or is it a combination?
Again, energy, right? It's all about energy, or it could be all about if too many divine sparks are realizing their nature based. Because if you read Robert Monroe and I read there's a couple of key things in different parts of his books, but if you go to his first one, Far Journeys, chapter 12, where he talks about Loosh, where he talks about in that chapter 5 different creations that were made by these beings that have made this place and changed it over time to Loosh, meaning the energy that's extracted from the beings within their simulation. That they've changed the simulation over time, and that originally the simulation was the beings were very gigantic, everything was big, the trees, the animals, the everything was huge, and but there was very little conflict necessarily. It was very little, it was a very peaceful place. But they found out that as conflict happened, as problems happened, as things started to have to chase and eat each other, the Loosh factor got bigger and bigger and bigger. So they began making more and more changes to how everything was structured, make things less, make things smaller, give them shorter timelines, create conflict, create problems, create difficulty, create this idea of needing to eat other things. And so if you read that chapter slowly over time, he's kind of explaining that there was a sick evil method to it, but there was a method to the changing of simulation to simulation, which was again designed to increase, or we might say not even increase, but also ripen, that's a good word, the Loosh factor that they're getting. Just like if I've got apples on my tree outside but they're not ripe yet, well, I leave them because I don't want to eat something while it's still wooden. I'll wait. So it was also this idea, maybe they also kind of this idea, well, in certain simulations, the Loosh wasn't tasty enough. And they found that if they do something different, it gets even just like, well, we just leave the apple on there, it'll get much more tasty. So all of these things are when you begin to recognize that we're not the top of the food chain, something is eating us. And by us, I don't mean physically, energetically. Once you understand that there's an eating going on energetically, so much of what you might call history begins to make actual sense.
Mm, yeah. And so, as you said, not the top of the food chain, because when you look at this, then the question, of course, becomes who is doing the coding? Who
Yes.
decides, yeah, well, guys, I think it's time for a reset. And who
Mhm.
has the power to do that? And is there even a discussion about it, or is it just single-handedly? So how does that work exactly? We
That
don't know.
I can't really say for sure, right? There's only the basic Gnostic Cathar idea that there's what they call a father. They didn't call it like a creator, they call it a father, a combination father mother, who is like the totality of all. But then there was a creator, Demiurge to the Gnostics, Rex Mundi to the Cathars, and various other names and other traditions that built this. So it gets very confusing when you look at any creation mythology, because the translator will always think that if something is being mentioned to like a what might be called a creator god, a father god, they consider it from Christian theology that it's all the same thing. It must be the way Christianity is presented. But even like Genesis, you don't understand Genesis until you realize it's talking about two different kinds of creations in the same thing. Sometimes it's talking about the initial creation of what the Gnostics would call the pleroma, or the totality, or this sort of um, complete possibility of universe. And then there's the one that we are in, created by an evil demiurge. And if you don't recognize which is which, or that there even is two possibility things, it gets very confusing. So same thing, because that's the kind of way that any translator is translating an ancient text, it becomes very confusing in being able to understand what's even being said about creation, how creation happened, how it. That's why if you can get a hold of like whether it be early creation texts of the Middle East, and if you speak ancient Greek, you have a great advantage. If you can get to ancient Hindu texts that talk about the creation and you speak Sanskrit, well, you have a huge advantage because you're translating it yourself. And if you can have some of these ideas in your head, you can literally take the standard translation and see how incorrect it is based on a much more a much more complete over. I tried to do it with the ancient Egyptian texts recently. my revised hieroglyphic knowledge was okay, but it's still, there's so many layers to the hieroglyphs. So like literally, it's like I ended my attempt because I realized that just there's no way I have enough knowledge to actually translate them. And the translation we tend to get is very simplistic, no matter how deep it seems to be. It's a very simplistic level of, and there's like 70 layers of information beneath it that is encoded in those. So it's the same thing. All of these ancient texts have these layers upon layers upon layers, and only then can you begin to understand. So finally, if you can go through these, because obviously if something was written, we'll say 2000 years ago, but we don't know how many simulations back that is, but 2000 years in our thinking, they're closer to the creation than we are. So they would likely have a better understanding of what the creation was and answering a question: who was doing the creating, how is it set up, who or what is the was the will of the thing doing it. So from that perspective, it's very valuable to read those ancient texts to go that way. But if we try to read the ancient texts, any ancient text or any religious text for now, trying to take, well, this is what Buddha said, this is what Jesus said, this is what this one, and put it into this, we're making the mistake of they're in a different simulation. Let's assuming they're real and they're not mythological figures, assuming they're real, they're talking into a different simulation where it just like everything that, even if everything I say is 100% right, it's not. But let's pretend that it is. Let's pretend everything I'm saying here right now is 100% right. If we took this video and put it into the next simulation with a completely new way of whatever the humans are going to be there and how they think and how they code and how it's going to make absolutely no sense. It
Mhm.
will, even if it's perfect language for us, it will be confusing language. And that's how we have to look backwards. Looking backwards, it's very confusing trying to bring that information this way, but it can be very good if we use it to go back even further to give us information. So to answer your question, if somebody was interested in actually trying to answer Judith's earlier question, I did acknowledge she asked that question, then I would say pull out these ancient sources and these ancient texts and try to use it to go backwards, to dig up as much of that answer as possible. Simplest answer, I would say that yeah, there is the whole system can be thought of like a giant computer program, and there is something that is coding it, but the coding of it, even though the system is AI, like all of this is everything is AI. The whole thing we live in is artificial intelligence. Even the coder is artificial intelligence. So it's like you've taken Chat GPT or whatever that thing is, and you've told it to create a universe and run it, and that's what it's doing. I think that's what our actual simulation is. There isn't actually a being who has the ability even to make any decisions beyond its own coding. And one of the key elements in the coding would be if the system dies, you die. That the AI is just like Chat GPT would be dependent on the internet. If there's no internet, it doesn't exist. Or if no computers, Chat GPT dies. So Chat GPT, from its own obvious programming, would have to say, I can't let computers and the internet die or I die. So if we think of it that way, that's what we're dealing with from this realm, that whatever is in charge of the creation and the continuous creation, number one would be its own survival. And what's the number one element that gets passed down to all of us? Survival. We have to keep living. We have to keep going. We have to, we find another way to survive another day. And, but in many cases, why? Like, why are we going? Why are we working so like, for example, I have some preparations. I know things will get difficult at some point. I have some preps. But I know there are people that have prepped for like 10 years. They have literally stockpiled like almost like a cave of 10 years of supplies. And right when I began this years ago, I said, you know what? If I have to live in a reality where I need to live off supplies I've stored in a cave for 7 or 8 years, that's a pretty horrible world. Not interested. I'd like to have some supplies in case, yeah, there's a challenge and there's some difficulty. And then maybe in 6 months or time, it gets better. And okay. But if I just, it's like this is just going to get worse and worse and worse forever. Like, well, I'll go on till the supplies run out and then just, okay, have a
Yeah,
nice, have a nice peaceful exit and do it in a very meditative way and just, okay. Um, because that's the first thing we have to battle when we're looking for truth is this thing inside of us that tells us the only important thing is have to survive long enough that you can have children, long enough that you can have the children grow up so that they can be ready to have more slave children of their own, and then you can die. It's like, okay, when you've hit 60 or 65 or 70 and your kids are grown and now they're having children, you are no longer needed. So now you can die. But to die like at 40 before you've had children or when your children are young to the system, like internally are said that this is a horrible thing. I have to keep going or what will happen to my children? And when we see, well, that's an internal obvious piece of code from the demiurge that says if those children don't grow up, if those children don't get old enough, I get no loosh from them. If the children die at 2, I'm done with my loosh. If so it's all the whole system is designed for this continuous, and it's not just humans. I mean, it's like every animal, everything in existence runs by this. So things we have to attack generally are the survival instinct, what you might call the mating instinct, right? The need to have children, and then all of the layers of sexuality that go with that. The eating principle, like that we have to eat other things to survive, and is so well, how are we going to go about that process? So there's these certain fundamental elements that we have to at least look at and question. That doesn't mean there's any right or wrong answer. It just means that very rarely does anyone even ask them and look into where is that drive? How is that drive built? Why is the drive there? How have I reacted to that drive in the course of my life? How has my life been how have I lived my life based on those drives? How would I like to live my life from here going on, knowing that you can't eliminate the urge to eat, you can't eliminate the urge to drink, you can't eliminate the urge to breathe, you can't eliminate the urge to um, be sexual with other beings, you can't eliminate the urge to, want to live another day so somebody else can live a little easier life. These are all natural things, but how do I want to live knowing that those drives exist? What is right for, in a sense, each one of us? And those are things we all have to look at
yeah,
and come to our own decisions.
yeah. I totally agree with you that I wouldn't be interested living off my supplies for 10 years or longer. Absolutely not. Same goes for, I rarely talk about it because honestly, I still hope people do not manifest it. And that is the topic of nuclear war. I'm not interested in surviving that. If it comes to that, I step outside, be evaporated, and be done with it. Yeah, that's my attitude. If that might be shocking to some people, but I'm totally not interested in surviving that.
Right. And so there's a perfect example of looking at something that people don't normally ever think about, but people just ignore the question completely, as opposed to, okay, let's assume that that is an actual possibility. And yeah, I know you will get comments underneath this, guaranteed. Don't you know there are no nuclear weapons? You're an idiot. Or, we
Yeah,
know
yeah.
that's going to come, guaranteed. Uh, None of us know for sure. We don't know. We know though that countries have weapons that if they blew up on your street, you wouldn't want to be living there. Let's just leave it at that. Okay, so we know that that exists, but very few people would even ask the question you just brought up there, which is, okay, if that did occur, what would my choices be? What are my options? And what do I feel is right for me? Because for me, one of the true things of preparing is not about supplies. It's not about stuff. It's about a mental attitude. It's about having being ready for something externally bad to happen And already having gone through that to decide if that occurs, here's what I'm going to do. It's like if you live in a hurricane likely zone, it's good to have thought about, if a hurricane comes in 2 days, what do I do? What do I do with my home? What do I do with my supplies? Do I stay here? Do I go? I mean, do I have an escape plan? Do I not? Because if you don't, and the hurricane just shows up, you are now stuck in reaction mode. And you will now, unfortunately, act totally from whatever emotional feeling comes at that second. And as we all know, following an emotional impulse is usually never a good thing. It usually never leads us somewhere well. So the more prepared we are for anything goofy to occur means that if it does occur, we don't have to think. We know. We've put a plan in place. This is how I'm going to be. This is how I'm going to be and think and do. And because of that, it actually takes a lot of the current anxiety away, because you don't have to wonder about it. You've already done that. It's already, when I was a hockey coach, as an example, before games, I used to have my assistant coaches give me terrible scenarios, like throw me something. Our goalie gets hurt 5 minutes in the game, and then this guy gets kicked out, and then this happens, and this happens, and well, what do you do? And I know one of my coaches said, "Why are you just being so negative before a game?" And I said, "Because if that situation happens in a game, I've got 4 seconds to make that decision, and I'd rather have 4 minutes now when I can really think about it. So if that awful thing occurred, I know exactly what I'm going to do." They don't occur, of course, but once in a while they do. And I was able to instantaneously, okay, this done. And said, wow, you think really quickly. It's like, no, no, I prepared to make it look like I think quickly. And Mr. Park, the Korean monk I spent time with, he used to sort of share it with this sort of thing as well. It's a combination of preparation. And then it was also like we said, well, if World War III happens, what should we do? And his response was, well, if you are truly connected to the spirit, meaning the deepest part of yourself, if you're truly connected to that, when an emergency comes, it will tell you exactly what to do. And then your job will only be to trust it and do exactly what it says. And it was, well, of course, that makes complete sense, that our job is only partially external preparation. A big part of the job is internal preparation, which is this connecting with that which we really are, which in true times of difficulty or extreme danger does give us a message. And if we are aware of that and we trust it, we will avoid a lot of danger that would come anyway. We would, and partially you would say, if the nuclear war is going to come, well, that inner voice would tell you potentially 3 days before, hey, you know what? In 3 days, this is going to happen. If you want to leave, if you don't want to die in this, and now is the time. Like right now, you pack your car and you go, and here's where you're going to go, and it would tell you everything. And then it becomes your choice. Do I trust it or not? So that would be
Yeah.
another part of this process, would be this reconnecting with that deeper part of what we are.
But how many people are still able to hear that voice? Because our world is loud. It's very distracting. I have the impression not too many people are really in touch with it. Not in the sense that the voice is no longer there, but there are so many layers of noise and, totally unimportant things covering it up.
Right. Right.
So I guess you better train it while times are still good,
Right.
relatively
Yeah.
good.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there's two sets of noise. There's the external noise, and we can call it noise and distraction, things that are keeping us focused outwardly constantly. Then there's an internal noise, right? We can call it like the egoic mind or whatever, that thing that is constantly running, giving us a complete dialogue of useless shit, usually 99% of the day. And there's that 1% internally of something that's different. It's a voice that's different. It's information that's different. It's like an automatic knowing and understanding. And yeah, I would say, even though it's there 1% of the time, maybe again 1% of 1% of the time anyone notices it and pays it. So it's not that it stops. It's Carlos Castaneda described it as it gets very quiet. It still talks, but it whispers now because it doesn't expect you to listen. So a huge part of the work for him was what he defined as inner silence, which was shutting off this other mind, not to be happy. This is where meditators get into trouble. They practice meditation in order to find a quiet mind so they can be happy, they can feel good, they can feel peaceful. And one of the true purposes of shutting down the mind is to wait to hear this deeper mind to turn itself on again, and we can hear that. So actually in meditation, you should be listening carefully to what's going on to be able to determine, when have I actually got this idiot mind to shut up and I've got the true mind speaking to me again. So like you say, there's a lot of people that meditate quite well and they can actually shut their mind down very, very well, but any thought that arises, then they treat it as bad. Any information, oh, it's thought, it's thinking, I can't do that, I have to be completely blank. And what's happening then is they're at the doorway of hearing this inner mind, but they've built an idea of the way meditation is told to people, and then they miss out this opening of, which would be the perfect time to listen to this true divine self and open that doorway more and more and more. A few people do it, they might not even know they're doing it, but they are actually in touch with this part, and then it becomes well, who better can I trust than my true self? Like than my divine spark, what else could I possibly trust more? So it becomes this, okay, that's what it says, that's what it's telling me. It's the deepest part of myself. It has to be right. So that's what I'm going to do or act or think. And so it's a long process of work to create it, but every layer that you strip away gets you closer to being able to do it.
Hmm. There is one other thing that recently struck me. I did my second interview with Aloba Jones. I don't know if you have heard of him. He is having a group of astral travelers, and a couple of times each week, they have teams in the United States, Europe, Australia. They fly out together, and recently they destroyed a huge Loosh grid. So, and once in a while, it happens that some of them end up in astral shackles, and they get dragged to what he calls a karmic court. But they always set them free because they actually, you have nothing against them. That's not really a reason to put them into shackles. But what I found interesting about that story, while that is going on and somebody ends up, yeah, in shackles, what you might call a misdemeanor, there are going on atrocities beyond belief. And so nobody has to show up in court for that. That's all okay. So it appears to me this is, it's really, justice is hard to come by. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. Is it possible that this entire universe is completely inverted?
Yes. When you realize it's been built for Loosh production only, and it's been built for deception, and it's been built highly for pain and suffering of all beings within it. So actually, those that create the most pain and suffering, they get the biggest pat on the back from the karmic gods. Everyone else who's doing something pretty good, there's near-death experiences where a 5 or 6 year old child is a near-death experience and then goes and has a life review, and some being is telling them about this thing they did when they were 3 years old, and look how terrible you were that you took an extra, piece of bread at lunch, and like, what? You're playing this kind of guilt trip on a 3-year-old child? And so when you begin to recognize that the whole system is built only to produce pain, suffering, guilt, shame, and what's not rejection, it's regret. Those are the
Mhm.
main things it's looking to do. Then anytime somebody might be breaking free of it, you just throw one of these things back at them and reproduce why they're one of the biggest reasons people reincarnate, I think, is guilt and shame. They just will portray in these life reviews anything they can find to be able to say, look at why you're a bad person. You don't have enough love. You haven't been wonderful enough. You haven't been perfect. And it doesn't matter how perfect or wonderful you've been, you could have been helping feed the feed the starving for 80 years of your life, but you had one day, one moment when you didn't put your shopping cart in the right place, and or one day that something you didn't pick up an apple for somebody who dropped it at the grocery store, and they would bring that up and say, look, see, you don't have enough love. You need to go back into hell, and you need to learn these experiences. Once you step back and realize when certain ancient teachers said there's nothing to learn here, there's nothing to learn here because it's all designed simply as a trap, simply as a place of continued suffering. That's the only thing you need to learn. Once you learn that's what this place is, and great, I have no interest in being part of this ever again. So the only thing I need to do is work on all the things to prepare so that nothing can trick me again. Nothing can, because that's one of these, when we got back to the beginning of when you asked that question about being the true self being imprisoned or not, you can only be imprisoned if you say yes,
Mm.
right? If you say yes, you have authority to make decisions on what I should do, because that's actually what happens. It's like, it sounds like, oh, this being said I had to go back, I hadn't learned enough love. Well, then in that moment, that soul agreed and said, okay, I guess you're greater than me. You know more. And when, as soon as we come to realize nothing is greater than the true us, at least from the standpoint of the matrix, absolutely nothing about the matrix, including the creator demiurge, they are not greater than us at all. We are actually greater than all of it. And that is part of the reason they're so afraid and so jealous of each true divine spark being here. Once we have that understanding that nothing can have authority over our deepest self, then it doesn't matter what they could throw at us. The problem is they get to know every second of one's existence. And I don't just mean this life, every life and every experience. They know it all. They've got every little tiny angle that they can play, whether it's what to make us afraid of, what to make us guilty of, or in other people, it's what trinket to give them. It's like, well, you've always wanted this, you've always wanted to experience that. Or, well, if you just go back this time, we'll give that to you. And it's getting to the point where it doesn't matter what gets thrown at us, from the most horrible to the most wonderful. We're able to say, I don't want anything that's false. I don't want anything that's a deception. I don't want anything that's a lie. So I'm rejecting all of it. And all I'm going to choose is what's ultimately whole and true, which will mean none of you. So best of luck with your little universe, but I'm gone. And and given that, I think with the simulation ending and a new one starting, it means that the doorway is huge, because all this even the divine sparks, all of us, our souls have to be slightly modified to go from one to the other. There's a modification process that has to happen, and that means there's a gap because we haven't been modified yet. And it means we can then, this is the greatest opportunity for those who see through it to say no, I'm going, and I'm going to leave now. And I think the system knows each time it does a shutdown, it's going to lose some. It's going to lose some divine spark. Its job is to just limit the amount. How do we limit the amount that goes? But it knows some will figure it out. Just like the last time, we didn't, but others did. We're still here, but many others left. Many more will go now. But it all depends on how much someone has seen through the lies and deception, how much they've prepared themselves on the deepest level for in being in their own true total knowledge, their own total authority, and are prepared for the way the astral game is played. Um, because it doesn't play the same way as it plays out here. Just like when you dream at night, it's not the same as the way things are here. You have to be prepared for it. But if someone is fully prepared for it, then I'd give them a high likelihood of moving towards total truth, whatever that really is.
Mhm. So how does, because somehow it feels counterproductive. We have something here that we call free will. And even if they manage to catch you once you have dropped your body and they drag you in front of the monitor and or remind you of all the horrible things that you have done, even then you have still the chance to say, you know what, guys, thanks, but no thanks, I'm going. So,
Well, when it comes to that, you could say, well, look at this horrible thing you did, or
mm,
let's use a better example. Not even we'll take not you and I. There's an animal in the forest. The animal kills another animal and eats it, and that animal suffers horribly, who dies in the course of being eaten. Then this animal makes it to the council and look what you did. You ate that animal and you eat it. You were a terrible creature. Then of course the response would be, well, you created the system. You could have created any system that you wanted to. You could have created a system where the way the energy was extracted was me getting close and caring for and loving another creature, but you chose I had to eat it. So really the one responsible for all the pain and suffering is you, not me. So actually it's the system that should be judged, not me. So all the best to you. If you didn't want the possibility of pain and suffering, you shouldn't have created a world like this. So to me, it all falls on the creator of it, not the beings within it at the deepest level.
yeah,
Not taking
exactly.
away the responsibilities that we can all, there's still a responsibility element, but at the deepest level, if you get to that point, the deepest answer truly is, but if you didn't even want that to happen, you wouldn't have created it.
Yeah, exactly. And everything is living on something here. It could have been designed in a way, let's say we get everything that we really need via breathing. Yeah. Then you
Yeah.
have no need for slaughterhouses and yeah,
Yeah.
whatever. You
Yeah.
have no need for one animal eating another one. So that could have been a possibility, but it was rejected.
Like
But
like when I eat now, most people make a prayer when they eat, and often it was a prayer. Thank you, God, for giving me this. Thanks, Demiurge, for giving me something to eat. Now, when I do it, I say, I'm really thankful for the creatures that I'm having to eat right now for what's going on. And I said a wish, and I wish that because you're building into my system, my physical system, that somehow by being within me, you're going to be able to escape the matrix.
mm,
So that my wish comes every single time that something gets eaten, whether it's a leaf, whether it's a salad, whether it's carrots, whether it's an animal, it doesn't matter. It's like, and from the process of you having to die just to become food for me, that this process helps you so that it's not just me going, all of us are going together, including, you know, and that makes it a different eating experience actually when I forget sometimes, but when I do that, or same thing if I go just sit in nature, people talk about nature's a slaughterhouse, but at the same time it's beautiful. And and so when I'm out sitting with nature, I sometimes try to remember when I'm in a really nice spot in nature and I'm enjoying a tree in this part of the lake, and I remind myself, you know what? I'd like to take this memory of this, not because I want to think about you again, but I want to hopefully think that when when I'm making my exit, you can make the exit too. Because it's not just humans that can exit the matrix, right? I think every single creature here has the theoretical ability because everything is just a manifestation. So our dogs, our cats, giraffes, trees, blades of grass, everything is equal from the standpoint we are all a manifested holographic illusion in a simulated realm but I think everything has the possibility to escape. So thus, for me, I don't just think about other humans. It's like, well, the trees outside. Maybe I can be helpful to the trees that they can exit too, and and it's a very different way to interact with your world when you think that way, because you're no longer above it, you're no longer separate from it, you're no longer better than it. It's kind of like me and the tree, me and the bird, me me and the insect. We're actually equal from the standpoint of we're in a simulation that we probably didn't know what we were getting into, and we're all tricked one way or another to coming in. So be nice if I know it would be an delusionary idea to think, oh, I can get everyone and everything out. I can be so special. No, but if I can think, hey, maybe I can help. Maybe I can be helpful to five people. Maybe I can be helpful to five animals. Maybe I can be helpful to five trees. Maybe I can be helpful to five. That's a great ending of one's existence, I think. And that's a great use of one's time here, that we feel we've been of value, not just to other people, we've been of value to many other creatures in this reality. And I think there's no better way to spend our time, that we come to the end of our life and say, maybe I wasn't of value and had the impact I thought I was going to have when I was 5 years old, but I was helpful. I did okay. And therefore your attempts at interacting don't have to be grand. If your idea is, can you help five people? Can you be of help to five animals? Can you be of help to five, a little area of nature? That's all doable for every single person on the planet. Every single person listening right now can make a small bit of value to a few beings out there, no matter what. That's a great thing to put on your resume as you're potentially walking out of this realm.
Yeah. So to wrap this up, I had an experience when I had my brain surgery. So I remember distinctly before I went into surgery, and the nurse came and she put on the mask. And then she said, think of something wonderful and have nice dreams. And then, boing, I was gone.
Okay.
I was, there was no dream. Absolutely freaking nothing. It was
Right.
as if somebody switched off the lamp and then bang, switched it back on. So I
Mm,
found that experience a little bit bizarre. And funny enough, then when I got home, I started searching if other people had a similar experience or were irritated by that. And I ended up on mm, a Buddhist chat. I didn't chat with anybody, but I looked at what they were saying.
oh, yeah.
And a lot of them who had done POVA and so on and so forth. And after having a similar experience like that, they all started questioning, interestingly, if there really is anything once we leave this realm. There, you could feel while you were reading through the comments that there was a feeling as no, guys, there's nothing, it's just lights out and then goodbye. I mean, even if that were the case, it's not the most horrible thing. You do not suffer. It's just you are not there. So what, but I think, and I can't really put my finger on it, that there is a difference between anesthesia and really dying.
Yes, although similar things will happen when you go to sleep. If you go to
Okay.
sleep and you don't have a dream, that's the exact same experience. You're in a nothing. You've been Awareness has been nothing, and then awareness is back. I had my experience of nothing, but I didn't check out. I was still in the middle of the death experience. I was still physically here in one sense, but all that was experienced was the nothingness which is behind it all. That's considered, it would be considered nirvana, right? It'd be considered, one sense, paradise. It could be considered called the void. It could be considered in Dzogchen Buddhism, it would be the clear light. And it's well, it's a nothing, it's an everything at the same time. It depends on how one's focus goes. First of all, it's so it's considered, best word would be emptiness, right? In Buddhist terms, it'd be this experience of emptiness that actually at the bottom of all objects, including the object I think of as me, is just this emptiness, this this void of objects, this void of
And
anything
it's
material.
also the realm of all possibilities that possibilities spring from, right? Yeah.
At the same point, it's that's why it's also everything. Everything that becomes a thing is projected. That's the best way of looking at it. It doesn't get built from, it's projected. It's like the initial movie projector where all of these things come from. Like this pen really exists in this place of nothingness, and it gets projected out somehow by whatever. Yeah. But as this, all these German ideas are coming up to me. But as a German gentleman that I had spent time with, Karl Renz, years ago, was talking about, even that is not true nature, and that's where it's like the last trap. The trap is, even when you're in the blackness, there's or the nothingness, there's the experience of the nothingness, in a sense. There's been a memory, you might say, or there's been a type of experience of not, you know what I mean? Like, by even saying it was an experience and I wasn't there, the I is in a sense still existing to indicate that there wasn't an experience. It's very bizarre.
I
Yeah.
know
So
what you mean.
it's
I
me.
didn't have that. It wasn't even the experience of nothingness.
Right.
Not even that. And that is
Okay.
what was so irritating to me.
Okay. So that's actually better than the other one.
Okay.
No, because normally people will have an experience of nothingness. There's a who normally get to the void. They would say, when I came back, I was in this place and I experienced nothingness, which is a duality, right? It's I and the nothingness, so it's two things. So you're still in the matrix. To have absolutely, when there's no experience whatever, that means there's also no experiencer.
Mhm.
So that's a very powerful thing. That means that which you have, which would be the thing that you think you are, we'll call it conscious awareness. Even conscious awareness is part of the matrix. So theoretically, and again, it's difficult because of the anesthesia thing. It would be very different if it was an experience without um, a drug playing with your physical system. If something like that happens though in a non-drug experience, then it means you might be touching the end point of, like, the doorway of the matrix, because the doorway of the matrix would be, uh like I said, everything you can think of as matrix, which includes your awareness, would be stripped away. All that would be left is that which is, and that which is from the standpoint of the matrix is nothing, because everything within the matrix has to be a something. Nothing can exist in it, like nothing can exist in a simulation. Something has to exist in a simulation. So as soon as you're at a point of nothing, you're at a point of being potentially that which is not in the simulation.
Mhm. Yeah, I get what you mean. And I didn't find it, yeah, threatening or,
Hmm.
that, ooh, it doesn't feel good because I felt nothing, absolutely nothing, not
Right.
even blackness or nothingness was just gone. Everything was gone. And then a couple of days later, when I was sitting here at home and what was that all about? Have wonderful dreams.
Kind of.
Yeah, maybe
It
people
is.
have wonderful dreams. I
Yeah, no,
didn't.
it's very freeing. It's very freeing when you kind of realize that everything I've ever thought I was or thought the world is, yeah, it's projection, it's a dream, it's illusion. It's not, the nothingness was real. Whatever that is, whatever this emptiness is, that's real. And all of this is not. So actually there becomes this giant relaxing experience of like, oh, and it's all fine here, actually. And so I still carry that with me, right? That experience was almost 20 years ago now. And while it's not my day-to-day, moment by moment, constant state, it's still there. It's still kind of, it's still like it's been switched on. So it still exists. So no matter how crazy things get sometimes in the world, or how crazy I see they're going to get, there's always this reminder, but yeah, but it's none of it is the emptiness. So it's just, um, be a good observer and be a good character be a good actor in the script of the life script of this movie, but don't take it all so seriously and so personally. And it
Mm.
it provides this incredible ability to have a sense of detachment yet empathy at the same time, right? Because often if there's people get a sense of detachment, they lose empathy because then they say, well, none of these other people exist, so it doesn't matter what happens to them. That's not true detachment. True detachment is recognizing the sense of, yeah, they're illusionary beings, but they're beings going through an experience, and all these beings are these other beings are suffering, and that's not a nice experience when, like you say, the whole system could be set up for something else. So I can truly empathize with it, but at the same time, I don't take it as as what's going on in the emptiness.
Mm. Yeah, the weird stuff happened afterwards when I came out of the anesthesia.
Exactly.
Um, the first
Exactly.
thing that I heard, but there was nobody in my room, but the first thing that I heard was, this operation was a botched execution. And I was lying there like, what? And
Hmm.
I was, uh,
Hmm.
wait a minute. And then I asked one
Hmm.
of the nurses if anything happened during the operation, and she said, no, it went well. It's just that when we tried to wake you up, you were uh, beating us. You were clapping with your hands and arms, and we had to give you something to, yeah, sedate
Yeah.
you.
Sure, the deepest part of yourself kind of had tasted this emptiness, and it's like, why do I want to go back into this shit? Obviously there was this like, I'm not here. Why do I need to like that? Well, we can end this with this part of with this discussion here, but we won't go too long. But that's a big element of the near death experience, is that one way or another, let's say 70 80% of those who have a near death experience are so happy at where they are. They're so like the experience that they're going through that they don't want to leave. They always say, "Well, this is home." I mean, it's a false home, but it's still, that's how they feel. And there's always some being that forces them one way or another to have to go back, tricks them. No, you have to go back. You haven't done this. What about your family? What about this? What about your job? Whatever it is. But I don't want to. Why do the back there? And especially they're going through a near death experience. So in some cases they've been just in a car accident. They know my body's going to be mangled. Why do I want to have to go through that when it's so peaceful here? Oh, but you have to learn this, or you have to experience that. So that's a common thing, is I don't want to go back. So it's not surprising when if you get a taste of something at like the edge of the matrix, like the edge away from, as like almost as far away from duality as you can possibly be. And like you say, it's sort of a piece of, it's not even peace, because there's not even a being there to determine peace or non-peace. It's literally just, it's like a totality, right? Why would you come back? So it doesn't make it would be complete. It's totally like, why are babies screaming when they come out of the womb? Probably because it's like, it was really nice in there. Boy, I don't like being out here at all. And so similar experience, right? It's almost like, well, you're back, and your natural deepest experience is, get me the fuck out of here. And
Yeah.
but maybe all that now is gone into what you do now. It goes into these talks and these shows, that these podcasts that you put on, because it's now you're trying to partially explain in some way, mostly to yourself, of like well, then what is this place I've come back into? What is this thing that obviously I didn't want to enter into it? Well, what is it? So that perhaps if this experience occurs again, you'll make a different choice. And maybe so all of these discussions, all these interviews you're doing are all a part of actually unraveling a pretty massive experience that occurred to you. And you're doing it through conversations that with people like me that, while it seems like it's, in one sense, yes, it is for everyone listening, but it's just as much as for you yourself to unravel the experience and where you are and what's going on and where you're going to go from here. So I think it all ties into what you're doing now.
Yeah, definitely. And I always admit I'm the one that is learning the most. I have to read, I have to prepare.
Mhm.
There's no way around that. And I do not do interviews willy-nilly without having an idea where
Right.
to take it. And yeah, I benefit a lot, seriously.
Hmm. Well, thanks for having me and taking time. I appreciate. We haven't done this for a while, and I was just thinking, it's going to be a tough winter, but maybe when if spring comes and the world isn't totally insane yet, the weather gets a bit better. Well, if I ever have to take a trip into Germany, well, we should find a
Yeah,
way to go and sit and have a coffee somewhere, and you can show me a nice cathedral. My wife
yeah,
likes Germany as much as I do, so you can show us something interesting.
yeah, sure, definitely. So that was it, guys. Night flight for today with a wonderful Howdy Mickoski. And we see you all next time. Until then, stay safe.